Well, enough time has passed. Hi, guys. So far as I know, nobody is here now, but that's okay. Today, we are going to be getting back into The Stone Child. Currently, we are at chapter 3, and for the past 2 chapters, well, if you want to know what happened in the last 2 chapters, you're gonna have to go and watch the last 2 streams that were up for the past 2 nights. Or, I guess I should say 3 nights? I didn't exactly stream yesterday, so not much I can help with there. Anyway, let's get into it. The Stone Child by Dan Pawlowski. Chapter 3. Ronald could see his reflection on the lake's surface. The cold air bit through his thin jacket. Time was running out. He looked at the crumpled paper. It was difficult for him to read the writing. The moon had almost sunk beneath the horizon, and the light was fading. He needed to solve the riddle before the caretaker realized he'd torn the page from the mysterious book. Ronald squinted to make out the position of the cross marks on the paper. He knew that the first X was the mansion itself, and he was pretty sure that the second X represented the statue of the girl in the clearing. But what location did the star represent? There were certainly plenty of stars reflected in the water, but which one held the answer to the question at the top of the page? As he looked at the other shore, trying to notice another clue, the toes of his sneakers slipped forward and touched the wet, muddy edge of the lake, sending out tiny ripples. He immediately leapt backward. His grandfather had warned him, no matter what, do not touch the water. Reflected in the water, some of the stars had already changed color from white to red. As he watched, they all turned, then began to move. In an instant, they divided into hundreds of pairs of tiny red eyes that watched him from under the lake's surface. Ronald took a step backward and almost tripped as he turned to run. He made it to the woods before he heard the splashing. "Here you are," said Mom. Eddie sat on the dusty floor of the barn, surrounded by piles of boxes. Ronald Plimpton's story lingered in his mind's eye like smoke. Even after seeing his mother standing in the doorway, it still took him a moment to realize where he was. The orange overhead light bounced off the rafters above. The pitched roof of the barn was hidden in shadow. Outside, it was starting to get dark. "I was looking all over for you," she said. "I'm gonna make dinner. Your father called. He'll be back from the garage in a few moments. They gave him a loaner so he can drive himself home. What are you doing here?" Once the movers had finished unloading the truck late that afternoon, Eddie had torn into the boxes they'd stacked in the barn. After seeing Nathaniel Olmstead's house on the hill and learning about the supposed curse from the tow truck driver, all Eddie had wanted to do was find his collection of books. Of course, he'd read them all before, but for a reason he couldn't quite name, Eddie needed to have them now. He wished he'd been more organized when he packed in Heaverhill. He'd forgotten to label some of his bedroom boxes. The movers had placed them in the barn with his father's antiques. Eddie showed his mother the first book he'd found, the one he'd been reading when she interrupted. The Rumor of the Haunted Nunnery. She pursed her lips. "Have you started on your bedroom at all? It's getting late." Eddie shook his head. He couldn't concentrate on unpacking yet. This book had captured him again. Mom had changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants to make the work of unpacking boxes more comfortable. It had been a long day. Leaning against the wooden door frame, she looked exhausted. "School starts the day after tomorrow, you know. You're not going to have much much more time to get organized before homework sets in. She suddenly looked closer at the book in his hands. Hey, isn't that by Nathaniel Olmstead? Said Eddie. Ronald was about to run away from the Monster Lake Dogs. The Monster Lake Dogs, said Mom. Sounds scary. Once he makes it back to the mansion, he feeds them leftover chicken bones and escapes. So it all turns out okay, said Eddie. Give me a moment. I need to divert to, hang up my headphones. Whew. I never realized that leftover chicken bones would work so well. That leftover chicken bones worked so well at getting rid of monster lake dogs. They're easily distracted, said Eddie, shrugging. If you read the book, you'd know. Maybe I should read those books, said Mom. I mean, if this town is cursed, I probably need to prepare myself. She rolled her eyes. Can you believe that guy from the garage? She said. I was nervous to leave your father alone with him. Creepy. Eddie laughed. I thought he was sort of cool. Cool? Said Mom. If serial killers are cool, then sure. That guy is very cool. Come on, let's go inside. You can help me find the pots and pans. But I want to find my books. They're all mixed up out here. Mom sighed, glancing around at the mess. She nudged an open box with the toe of her boot. Here, what about this one? She reached inside and pulled out a leather-bound book. She tossed it to Eddie. He was surprised when he actually caught it. Eddie had never seen it before. It was unlike the well-worn paperbacks for which he had been searching. Hi! Welcome. You've missed actually quite a lot. We're almost to the end of Chapter 3. You'll have to start the stream from scratch after this. Whew. And now I shall continue. Where was I? The cover of the book was sturdy. The leather was tight but slightly worn around the edges. From the side, Eddie could see that the book was not thick, maybe 150 slightly yellowed pages. The gold lettering stamped directly onto the brown leather read the enigmatic manuscript. Despite its size, the book was heavy. When Eddie lifted the cover, it creaked, snapping at him as the old glue bent. Eddie found words scrawled in black ink in the center of the first page. When he read them, he gasped. A story by Nathaniel Olmstead. Underneath the author's name was a strange symbol. It looks kind of like a backwards pie, in case you're wanting to know. Or a forwards pie? It's been a long time since I've seen the pie symbol. Anyway, Eddie didn't know what it was supposed to mean. The enigmatic manuscript? What is this? He said. Isn't it one of your books? Said Mom. Shaking his head, Eddie held it open and showed it to her. Realization washed across her face. Oh, she said, I remember now. I picked up that book when your father and I came down for the Black Hood Antiques Fair a few months ago. I thought it looked interesting, like an old-fashioned artifact. We didn't know what it was, but your father thought it might be worth something. Isn't it odd that Nathaniel Olmstead's name keeps coming up today? Odd is an understatement, Eddie thought. He suddenly felt as if the entire day could have been written by the missing author himself. A piece of the man seemed to be everywhere Eddie looked. But the author's name on the first page was nothing compared to what was on the next page. Eddie nearly dropped the book on the floor when he read. Okay, so I'm not going to show you a picture because I didn't feel like writing all of this down. Instead, it's groups of letters in bunches of 3. And it goes on, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 across and 5 down. And it's basically a puzzle. Puzzled, Eddie flipped through all the pages. He found the rest of the book to be the same, filled with 3-letter nonsense words. He showed the book to his mother. "What does it mean? Is it a sort of code or something?" "Whatever it is," said Mom, heading back toward the house, "you've got a day to figure it out before school starts." "Do you think Dad will mind if I hang on to it?" "We'll ask him at dinner. If you do figure out what it means, he'll probably thank you, especially if it did belong to this Olmstead person. Maybe it is. Maybe it actually is worth something." "Wow," said Eddie. "This is so cool. Thanks." After dinner, Eddie's mother came upstairs to say goodnight. She kissed his cheek while he sat at his desk. "I'm going to try to write a little bit tonight before I totally crash into pieces," she said. "I know it's been a long day, but try to organize your room before bed, okay?" "I'll try," Eddie said as she closed the door. "Good night." Like the rest of the quaint bungalow, Eddie's new bedroom was on the second floor. Like the rest of the quaint bungalow, Eddie's new bedroom on the second floor was a mess. Empty boxes, crumpled pieces of newspaper, and piles of clothes littered the floor. A mess he'd managed to make since coming in from the barn. Much of the room lay beneath the tilt of the roof, but there was still plenty of space to stand. A gabled window with a southern view out over the town cut into the sloping ceiling. The sun had set and the sky was indigo. Eddie picked up the book his mother had found in the barn. It smelled awful, like dirt or mold. Weird. He opened the first page again. The strange symbol leapt out at him. Eddie placed the book onto his quilt and scrambled under his covers. He reached out and ran his index finger down the spine of the book, feeling the impression of the title stamped vertically onto the cover. A story by Nathaniel Olmstead? What if the enigmatic manuscript was in fact a handwritten Olmstead book? A new novel that no one had read before? It was possible. After all, his parents had found the book only a few towns away. Nathaniel Olmstead's name on the first page might actually be his signature. But if it was an unpublished novel, why would he have written it in a code language? Whatever the reason, Eddie was certain that there was something inside the book its author hadn't wanted anyone to know. Eddie stared at the ceiling, his shoulder throbbing faintly where the seatbelt had caught him. It had been such a weird day. Leaving his old house behind and driving from Heverhill would have been unusual enough, but then his father had to go and hit that creature in the road. Its gash of a mouth lolled open when Eddie shut his eyes for a moment. He shuddered and sat up, propping his pillow against his headboard. After the accident, seeing the author's house and learning about the supposed Olmstead curse only added to the day's peculiarity. Eddie knew that every town has its legends, but before he had even had a chance to look around Gatesweed, it seemed as though, in a way, the spirit of Nathaniel Olmstead had come to haunt him. The funny thing was, Eddie didn't mind. Figuring out the book would be like exploring Nathaniel Olmstead's world, almost as if he were a character inside one of his stories. Plus, Sam had mentioned that Olmstead wrote about places in Gatesweed. Living here, Eddie could explore his world from the outside, too. Like the characters in Nathaniel Olmstead's books, Eddie had several questions. What exactly is the Olmstead curse? Why do people move out of Gatesweed but not in? What exactly had happened to Jeremy, Sam's childhood friend? This last question left Eddie feeling queasy instead of excited, the way he felt about the others. Strangely, this third question was the one he was most afraid of answering. Where should he begin? Eddie looked down at the book in his lap. In the rumor of the haunted nunnery, Ronald found the key to decode a secret message. The message allowed Ronald to find the lake in the woods. Eddie knew Nathaniel Olmstead liked to include codes in his books. Could the writing in the enigmatic manuscript be one of those codes? If the town library had books about secret codes, maybe Eddie wouldn't need to find a key, like the one Ronald had discovered. Maybe Eddie could solve the code himself. Shouldn't be too hard, he thought, after reading all of Nathaniel Olmstead's books several times, he'd become pretty good at figuring out stuff like this. One more day until school? Plenty of time, he thought with a smile. And that is the end of Chapter 3. We'll be taking a short break so I can actually make the thumbnail for the next chapter, and then we'll be right back. So I'll see you guys soon, and I hope you enjoyed the read.